there's there's just never a dull moment when it comes to horse racing. As West Point partners, I'm sure many of you can attest to that. And that was really first and foremost on my mind. Christine and I and Jason, Joe, and Tommy welcome you to this latest WPT in 30 Preakness edition. Christine and I took Z for a walk, I don't know, an hour ago through the neighborhood. We come back and got the news that Muth, who I thought was, and again, I don't think Muth is a superstar. I still thought he was going to win the Preakness from my house to yours, Tommy, in Kentucky. Uh, he's scratched. He got a fever. So let's go Mystic Dan.
Yeah, why not? I mean, let's get a Triple Crown bid going to Saratoga. That'd be something else. I think I've brought it up before, but I think that would just be fantastic for racing. And even with the scratch of Muth, I still think it's a fantastic race. And middle jewel of the Triple Crown's up for grabs.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about the Preakness in depth on this. I don't know how in depth one might go, and that's not to say we're not excited. And there's a lot to like and unpack and root for with Mystic Dan's story and his connections for sure. Not a vintage Preakness. I feel like that's a popular phrase that has come out of my mouth the last few years. But no, we're still excited about it, Joe. And we've got a lot of horses on deck between basically this weekend through, of course, the Belmont and Saratoga, which at this point is a mere 3.5 weeks away.
Yeah, that's the next big circle date on my calendar or dates is that week. Seems like we're going to have a lot of action. I'm just interested to see how it goes down. Like, Saratoga during the summer is a different vibe than the Belmont Stakes week. And I'm sure it's going to be sold out. Downtown's going to be crazy. So yeah, it's going to be a fun couple of days and really just kind of a revolutionary thing for the sport to have the Belmont up there.
And it's a scary, as Tommy mentioned, it's a scary thought just to think what that city might be like with a Triple Crown possibility on the line. And he's a blue collar kind of horse too. He's not a New York bred like Funny Side per se with locally owned connections, but he's got a little bit of that funny side vibe going. Mystic Dan does. So without further ado, guys, why don't I share my screen here? Let's get this going. And we'll head on over. Good. We've got you got to optimize the video, guys, for sharing. I mean, that is just
No
words,
brainer.
words, words to live by. I live my life by optimizing the screen. Oh, I was checking out. Speaking of Mystic Dan, I was just kind of going through his pedigree. I do love the DRF so much. Only PPs I think worth using. Not to disparage Eddie, but I love the form so much, and Formulator is just the best.
Yeah.
Come to think of it, they ought to maybe sponsor our West Point podcast here because their PPs are front and center every week when we do the show. So no Muth, he's out. Joe, starting with you, I mean, Mystic Dan's clearly going to be the favorite. I'm not sure how short he's going to be. I mean, maybe you're looking at around 8-5, 9-5 or so on Mystic Dan. What about the pace, though? I mean, the pace is really, really altered with no Muth in the race.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't this be such a Bob Baffert thing that he scratches his top contender for the Preakness, and then Imagination goes wire to wire? And honestly, I could see it. From the outside draw, Frankie's got no other option. He's got to go. And I don't know that. I think a lot of people are going to think that he's going to come back to the field. And I don't know, like he's not going to be 6-1 now. Obviously, he'll probably be in the 3 to 4-1 range, but he scares the hell out of me. If I'm a Mystic Dan fan, like I know he's got some speed. He's not completely slow early, but I don't know if you're going to have to be the one on the chase on it with Imagination, could put you in a tough spot.
Could, but and I guess he's improved. I mean, he's clearly raised his game. I mean, even just looking at what he's running on Bayer from his 2-year-old season from mid-February on, and you like to see that. And he's game, but because he's been in some dogfights pretty much in every one of his races. The last 3 have all been basically a neck or less in photos. I question how good he is, though, and I don't trust him, and he's going to be underlaid because of the pace. What about Chad Brown's horse right next to him? I mean, Chad really has had a knack for, and this horse wouldn't have gotten to the Kentucky Derby anyway, but I got to say, and give credit where credit's due, Chad has skipped the Derby on occasion. Cloud computing comes to mind. Early voting comes to mind. And both those horses won the Preakness for him. I got to think, Tommy, with him scratching Tuscan Gold out of the Peter Pan, which turned out to be a pretty soft renewal last weekend up in New York, this horse looks about as well meant to me as any Chad horse could in the Preakness.
I agree. I mean, the horse is lightly raced, but like you said, Chad has been known to skip the Derby to go to the Preakness. And this horse would not have made it in the starting gate Derby points wise anyway, so it made no sense for even try to go there. But him going straight from Louisiana Derby and going all the way up to the Preakness is very on brand for Chad. The horse has run 3 times. He's proved, leaps and bounds to every start. So if you're one of those people that follows form like that, this horse makes a lot of sense in this race. If you think that he's going to take a huge step forward, I like that Tyler's on board. He's had him in his last 2. I mean, he ran well in the Law Derby as well. So I think this horse can be dangerous, and I wouldn't be surprised if this horse is a little more forwardly placed than we've seen him before as well, just because with Muth out and then Imagination to his outside, I think being the real big speed threat in this race now, this horse makes sense to kind of break right off of Imagination. I would imagine Imagination is going to clear everybody and try to get to the rail early on, and wouldn't be surprised if this horse is kind of right off his hip a little bit, or maybe a length or 2 back off him, just kind of stalking him all the way around. Try to get that perfect clean trip and bank the jump top of the stretch.
Definitely. He's a bit of a grinder, this horse, but he can stay. He's already gone a mile and 3/16. And I think you bring up a great point, Tommy, just in terms of his running style, that he does seem to be somewhat tactable and tractable, where he could potentially get himself up and on what might not be all that fast of a pace. We've got Just Steel, who in fact was an early pace setter. It was him, Fierceness, and Track Phantom, who should have raced in the Pat Day Mile. It was the 3 of them that carved out the early fractions. He's one of 2 in the race, Just Steel is, for D. Wayne, who's got the horse that won the Pat Day Mile. Not a strong renewal of the Pat Day Mile. I'm a Nash guy. I like that horse. There's just no doubt in my mind Nash has not turned out to be nearly as good as I thought he was when he first burst onto the scene last fall as a 2-year-old for Godolphin. And we touch upon your Kentucky Derby winner in Mystic Dan. Wonderful story. I mean, Brian Hernandez, Ken McPeak, seeing the 2 of them take center stage and getting the press and the headlines, it's been a breath of fresh air. It really has. And I'll tell you, Joe, going back and watching the Derby again, he may not get enough credit even before he bowled his way and found that, I mean, it basically was even less than a path just as they rounded the bend for home. But he was up close on that pace, which basically took care of, well, Fierceness was 3rd early. Epic Ride made that early move outside. Track Phantom, who was the speed inside, ran 9th. And the speeds, my point is, the speeds were nowhere. Mystic Dan was not far off that pace.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the point I made last week, that, yeah, you could say he saved all the ground, but he also had to run much harder early than the 2nd or 3rd finishers in that race. I thought Stronghold ran okay too up on that pace, which I think flatters imagination a little bit. But yeah, Mystic Dan certainly isn't slow. You could go back in his PPs and see he won 2nd time out, going 5.5 furlongs, dueling on the lead. He's just, I think he's found his niche as kind of that stalker, that 1-run stalker. And the thing with him is like, how short of a price do you want to take on him now that Muth is out? Like, I liked him much better before Muth scratches, because like you, I didn't think Muth was like this American Pharaoh type horse that they were billing him as. But now Mystic Dan's going to be like 6 to 5, and you already have Kenny McPeak openly saying, when I ran this horse on 2 weeks rest last time, he stunk, and that's why I didn't want to do it. Now, obviously, it's a good sign that he says all systems are go now, and on his best, he's the best horse in the race, but he's much less exciting to me from a betting perspective with the 4 out of the race.
Catching Freedom, too much of a deep closer? What's the story with him?
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way like as I felt about him going into the Derby. He's going to have too much to do, and to his credit, he runs every time he makes that closing run. I think honestly the X factor in this race, the more that I look at it, are going to be the two Lucas horses because Just Steel and Seize the Gray. Like Wayne is like one of these guys that usually wants his horses to show speed, and Just Steel obviously was part of the pace in the Derby and Sees the Gray with Jaime Torres, probably not going to be that far back. So they're the ones that I don't like to win, but I think could throw a little fly in the ointment for Mystic Dan or Imagination. And that's the only way I can see Catching Freedom winning because it's a 16th shorter. You know, they always say it's the tighter turns. I don't know about that. It's a shorter stretch for sure. But yeah, he's going to need a lot of help up front. And, you know, for a horse that's going to be a relatively short price.
So top pick, Joe, for you in Preakness 149. Who is it?
It's Imagination. I just think, you know, he's going to get loose. You know, maybe Just Steel goes with him, but I got this feeling like this is a Bob Baffert special where everybody counts him out because Muth is out of the race, and then all of a sudden he pops up and wins the Preakness anyway. So that's where I'm going.
And what about you, Tommy? Are you a Tuscan Gold guy?
I like him, and I'm right now I'm leaning towards Catching Freedom. I know Joe said he's going to have a lot to do coming from way back, and the scratch and boot doesn't help him, but he's shown he can get the distance. I think that he's bred for it, and he's just the type of horse that Cox wins these kind of races a lot. I feel like, and this is kind of a cookie cutter Brad Cox horse. I mean, he seems tough as nails. He shows up every time, and I think that knowing that Muth's out, I wouldn't be too surprised if Flavin has his horse a little more forwardly placed, or he kind of hustles him a little bit out of gate and tries to keep him engaged, keep him close so he doesn't have to float all the way back and make a huge move and try to bob and weave through traffic. But thinking Catching Freedom is my Preakness horse.
All right, you're with Catching Freedom for Brad. Joe's got the Baffert second stringer, who's got the speed Imagination. I'll go with the Derby winner. He was one of a couple of price horses I thought might run okay in the Derby, and again, phenomenal 3-horse photo. I'll take Mystic Dan. I get the reservations on the 2-week turnaround, and he's going to be nowhere near 20-1. He ran great last time. He's still consistently the fastest horse in the race, looking at his numbers. And I'll say, you know what, racing gods this year, after a tough Triple Crown season in 23, we hopefully leave Old Hilltop late Saturday, heading to historic Saratoga Springs with a Triple Crown on the line and a Belmont that is potentially shaping up, especially if Mystic Dan wins this race on Saturday, with some of the new shooters and the Derby also rans that aren't coming back in the Preakness. I mean, we could really have a legendary kind of Belmont Stakes in 3.5 weeks. What about, gang? And good luck to our horses racing this week. We're going to touch upon the Maryland Sprint in just a second. We've got the old campaigner SWOT analysis in tomorrow. He'll run Thursday at Churchill and a 2 other then. You're probably, Joe, as far as like the team closest with the Cassie crew and DJ Stable, of course, who at one time we owned SWAT with. What's the vibe with SWAT? I know from my end, he's just been a war horse. It's a nice parallel, like just mentioning him and wishing him all the best tomorrow in Kentucky, and then going right over to Jaxon Traveler, because the two of them they just have a lot of similarities.
Yeah, no, for sure. We love these horses that make it to their 5-6-year-old season and keep showing up every time. You know, I think the vibe with SWAT is that people were pretty pleasantly surprised that last time he was denied the lead and still ran so well. And he's gonna have to do that again because there's a lot of pace on paper in this race. Big field. You got some speed from the inside with Midnight Taxes. You got Champlin, that lightly raced horse for Greg Foley, who's got a bunch of speed. Thankfully, he's drawn outside, so I don't think he's going to be under the gun from the start. But yeah, he's one of these horses that has in the past kind of packed it in a little bit when he didn't get the lead, but didn't do so last time. Ran great, and yeah, he's just still doing his thing as a 6-year-old gelding. $62,000 OBS June buy, made over 315. What's not to like?
There's nothing not to like. He's been just a fun horse to watch strut his stuff over the last few years. And then we've got Western Command running Preakness Day beneath the Twin Spires and running just shy of 8 p.m. Eastern. Are you going out for him, Tommy? Because I'm happy to see. I like Western Command, but I've been one I guess mutter to myself after his last couple of races. Like I've been waiting to see this horse get a little class relief, and I like the fact that he's running for 30K. It's just time with him.
Yeah, I'm heading out Saturday. Downs After Dark here in Louisville. It's one of the big events that we got going on. But yeah, like you said, I like he gets his class relief here, and then can't beat night racing at Churchill. And so I think it'll be a good night. So if any partners in Louisville, if you're looking for something to do, come on out. Just come see the races under the lights in the Twin Spires. That paddock at night is a sight to behold. If you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend you see it, and especially at night, it's breathtaking.
Nice. Cannot wait to experience that. I was there for the Derby, of course, saw it in sunlight, and it blew my mind. But I hadn't even thought the difference between night and day and what it must be like. I was going to say I've never been to a Downs After Dark card. I was there for the Zenyatta Breeders' Cup, so it was pretty dark, and they ran like the Ladies' Classic the day before, and of course the famous Classic with Zenyatta and Blame. That was under the lights. But man, I would love, it's got to be a great vibe. It always seems like they get a great crowd. I would really like to go on like a quote unquote just kind of a regular day to take it all in, because I do love going to Churchill Downs. I really do.
Yeah, it's a great time. So if you ever get a chance, I highly recommend it. Love to have you.
All right, you heard it from Tommy, folks. Make sure you give him a text, and he'll buy you a pretzel, and have one for me too, my friend.
I have one waiting for you. Make sure to keep it warm.
I appreciate that, brother. So,
by the way,
good luck.
You're talking about that Breeders' Cup. How glad are we that they don't call it the Ladies' Classic anymore?
Oh, dude,
So
again, yeah, it's like racing fans in general, not all of us, but I think I know I can speak for the two of you, like in terms of like a purist, like almost at times maybe to like an obnoxious degree. I'm pretty stingy when it comes to changes, and yeah, that did. It kind of bothers me, Joe, that I even referred to
I was surprised.
the races. Yeah, seriously. I mean, I guess technically I was correct. It was called the Ladies' Classic back then, but and Unrivaled Bell won that race that year for the great Bill Mott. But yes, I am very happy, like you and Tommy. We are back to the Breeders' Cup distaff. That is the way it should be, and again, I won't mince words. Being a purist and a traditionalist, it warms my heart to see a horse, and this isn't quite Jackson's lifetime cut here with his entire race record, but I mean, taking a look at his last 25 races out of the 29 that he's run, you got to just love horses like this. And I want to get both of your thoughts on this race. And Joe, I'll segue with Jaxon. This is not an easy race as he looks for his second career win in the Maryland Sprint on the Preakness undercard. Far from a layup. However, I will say in terms of like the overall talent level, and I feel depth of this race, while far from just an easy spot, these are horses, if he runs comparable to his race in the Whitmore back in mid-March at OP, he's gonna have a chance. Am I crazy thinking that?
No, absolutely not. The biggest thing is there's no Skelly in here. Like that's, you go into those races with Skelly in it and you're like, man, if we could run second, that'd be great. And he's not in here, so it's a much more wide open race. I mean, you got the two horses coming out of the Frank Whiteley from Laurel, who ran that big 100 buyer each. So you got to think you got to get around them a little bit, but that number is kind of an aberration on their form compared to the other races that they've run. Prevalence is a little scary to me. He's just one of these horses who is like, he's been a bit of a disappointment with the way he started his career, but he can pop with a big race from time to time, which he did at Keeneland last time out. But one of the things I like is Jaxon is when 6 starts at Pimlico, 3 wins and 2 seconds. And I think that matters in the race like this with a lot of horses who are not necessarily based here, who are just shipping in. You have no idea if they're going to like the track or not. And Prevalence is one of them. He ran second in the Maryland Sprint, but he got dusted by Straight No Chaser. So I think it's an advantage that Jaxon has proven that he likes this surface, and he's got the speed to set the pace if nobody else wants to go, but he can also lay close and still run. I mean, yeah, get away from Skelly, get back to a track you know you love, and I think he'll be fair value at like 5 or 6 to 1 in here.
He's got that high cruising speed. He drew well. I will add, though, Tommy, the pace in this race confused me a little bit. I mean, Prince of Jericho has got speed. Bourbon Bash, I guess, isn't all that slow. There looked like there were 3 or 4 horses, Super Chow probably being the most glaring. A few horses that have a very similar running style to ours, but I guess what gives us confidence is no matter what kind of trip or race flow Jaxon gets, if he's on his game, he's going to run. I mean, he's never been one to have a race a specific way, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he's just such a versatile horse where he's won at countless different tracks in countless different ways, whether he wants to go to the front, take him all the way around, come from the back, or kind of sit stock mid-pack like he did in the Whitmore. But to your point on the pace, I think it's all about Super Chow. I mean, this horse is kind of he needs the lead and he's going to want to get it. And he's done it just about every race. Look at his form, just what he does. And then another horse you mentioned, I think that's going to be probably doing it with him up front. And for our sake, I hope they do want to hook up front is Prince of Jericho, just because that horse too is really just the last few races has been really forwardly placed, really close up front, and it's run some nice races at Laurel. And then Bourbon Bash too is a horse that I kind of keep my eye on, just as kind of the wild card in my mind. You know that he's going to be close. I would imagine him and Jaxon will more than likely get a fairly similar trip just because of their running styles. So I'd really like to see us kind of hook up with him. Hopefully we don't get pinned with him on our outside. Maybe we can even clear him and have him kind of sit off of us and still leave that lane open to make a move. But again, I mean, Flavian rode him perfectly in the Whitmore. I think that if we can run back to that and get that same trip, same ride from Flavian, we have a great shot here. And again, as you said, he's won 3 times out of 6 tries here. So he's the only horse with multiple wins over the track. So I think that's going to play a huge part in who's going to really like the track. We know we're going to love it. We're not sure about just really any of the other horses are really going to love it. They're going to hate it. It's hard to say. So I really like our chances. And like Joe said, I think he's going to be a fairly good value play. So if everyone's looking to make any money, I think he might have a good shot at a nice price.
Pretty amazing. I mean, 2 years have passed since he won the Maryland Sprint. To have him back with already a stakes win on his resume as a 6-year-old in 2024, it's pretty incredible. If you had told me Preakness Day 2022, which in a lot of respects and ways feels like an eternity ago, that he'd still be running at this level, again, 24 months down the road, I would have signed up for that in a second. Good luck to Jaxon. Speaking of big races, guys, I did want to, before we have a little Preakness rundown, it was a pretty good weekend for the stable. Soho lost a tough one. All right, out west, and I'm sad to say I actually bet her to win. I just felt the way she was training, the way the race set up at Santa Anita, that she was going to fire a big race. Not down on her at all. In fact, the contrary. It hurt not cashing in. She probably would have paid $6.80 or so, but she ran great in her comeback race. I would say, though, guys, the weekend star for the entire stable happened to be Johanna Honor, running that big second in the Man of War Stakes. Joe, you were there. I mean, give it to me with Ohana. I was tickled pink to see him continue that progression and not only continue to improve, but do so. That was a grade 1 caliber field, as we discussed on this show last week.
Absolutely. And like this was a big class test for him. And to see him pass it with flying colors, I mean, I'm almost like I'm a little bit in disbelief just because of how far that he's come. I'm like, yeah, as proud as I am of him, I'm like, yeah, let's see him do it next time. Let's see him do it next time. And he keeps doing it. And now he's proven without a shadow of a doubt he belongs at this level. Like to beat a horse like Nation's Pride, who was one of the best turf horses in the world on his best race. You could argue whether or not he ran his best race on Saturday, but regardless, to beat him is a massive, massive accomplishment. Obviously, the other Charlie Appleby was much the best. He's no slouch himself. But yeah, it was just so awesome to see him, especially dig in and get up for second there. And yeah, why can't he be a reasonable contender in the Sword Dancer this summer? Yep. Which, rewind a year ago, last summer, when he was 0 for 6, someone would have told you that he'd be a legit contender for the sword dancer a year from now, you would have asked what kind of crack I was smoking. And
Yep.
it's just great to see him progress like that and keep stepping up despite the rise in class. It was awesome.
I mean, literally a minute before we hopped on, and thank you to Jeff Lowe behind the scenes for getting us going on the podcast today. I literally hung up with Shug about a minute, maybe even less than a minute before we started taping this. And I'm happy to say Ohana's come out of the race great. I gave Shug kudos. I said, I got to tell you, Shug, when you said you just felt making him a Ridgeling may really get us back on track. He said, yeah, it worked out pretty good, didn't it, Jason? I said, yeah, Shug, it definitely did. So races like the UN, the Bowling Green, the Sword Dancer, the Arlington Million, those are very much in play and on the radar. Cortez did not run as well as he had. It was a much, much, much tougher field than what he faced in the Pan American. You know, I'm curious, Tommy, what you think. For me, my knee-jerk reaction was maybe a slight dip in class might work out well for him. He's definitely a stakes horse. I don't know if he's quite like the grade 1 caliber horse per se at this point.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think just a slight, I don't think a huge drop in class is necessary for him, but just taking, a little knockdown, listed stakes level, some black deck level stakes for him would be a great way to get him back on track, just to drop him down there, pick up a win, get him feeling good about himself. A lot of these horses, when they get beat sometimes, a lot of them are mental. They can get in their head just like, human athletes are. So with him just going back down, little knockdown in class, go beat up on some other horses, get him, feeling good about himself in a good mental spot. And I think he'll be fine. I mean, obviously we saw what he can do at Gulfstream, and I just think last out in the Man of War, he just had a little too much to do. He was a little further back than I would have thought or I would have liked in that race. And then he just kind of had to make his move. And then as we saw, I mean, those leaders were just way too far for him to run down.
He was 22 lengths back at one point, 22 lengths behind the pace setter.
I didn't know he was that far back. Wow.
Yeah, I didn't realize, dude, he was that he was 22 lengths off.
That's what
leader.
Christoph said. Yeah, it was a spaced out field.
Yeah. And that's when I kind of knew he's going to have, at that point in the race, when I saw him so far back, I figured, man, this is going to be a really, really tough one for him to overcome. But all in all, I still thought he ran well. Obviously, Ohana, I think, kind of stole his thunder in that race by running so well and really digging in down that stretch. But nonetheless, I still think he's going to be a really nice stakes horse for us down the road, hopefully for a couple of years.
Definitely. Longevity should be the key with Cortez. No, and we'll get him back on track. Christoph will find the right kind of spot at a stakes level to bring him back. Speaking of stakes level, Final Boss, love seeing him. I mean, he's got some stride on him as well. I mean, he's by a Triple Crown winner, an American Pharaoh. And I mean, it looks like, again, you watch just how long, lengthy, and fluid the way he covers the ground. It was like a sight to behold. And I'm talking not in deep stretch. Like, even when they went by the wire for the first time, I'm like, all right, if he doesn't like going a mile and a furlong, I'm going to be really disappointed, because I always kind of felt he'd be a horse that would really blossom in longer races. And he ran really well in that other than Sunday out at Santa Anita. So it looks like, knock on wood, we'll have a stakes 3-year-old turf horse moving forward with Delmar, not all that far in the future. And then Joe, last for the recap, Independence Avenue was in as tough a field as you could find, I think, at this time of the year for 3-year-old fillies going short on the grass. And Ramon Perez rode her perfectly. And again, I walked away from her narrow 4th place finish in the Soaring Softly. I was just thrilled with how big she ran in that race against a very tough field.
Oh, same. Like I'm gonna be 100% honest that I thought she had no chance in that race, and it wasn't because like Arno, oh, what's he doing putting a horse in over her head? It's just one of those situations where they're not going to write 2 other thans for straight 3-year-old fillies sprinting on the turf. So you either are faced with the choice of either running against elders or running against 3-year-old fillies in stakes company. So that's where she landed, and She ran her eyeballs out. Like, she broke great. The inside speed she put away, finished last, which I always like to look at like the context within a race of the race shape. Tiger Bell was dead last, and she dug in all throughout the lane. Only slight bummer was missing graded stakes placing by a nose. That was bad luck. But man, did she run hard. And yeah, she proved that she belongs at this level. And there's plenty other stakes for her going forward. There's a race at Monmouth in July, the Blue Sparkler. There's a couple of other stakes at Colonial and Laurel. You know, she's eligible for the Monmouth allowance condition, even though she would have to face Elder. She can run in an N1X at Monmouth. And yeah, like I was floored by how well she ran in that race. I was already preparing my speech to the partners, like, oh, she's a young filly, like she's still gonna get there, blah blah blah. And I didn't have to do any of that because she just showed up and showed out, and I was, you know, really happy for. And again, like a $60,000 OBS June buy, like you love to see these overachievers. Arno has done a phenomenal job with her. It was her first race since January too. Like, she was, I was, you know, for a fourth place finish, you're not usually this gaga, but for her in that race, I was flabbergasted that she ran that well and thrilled, obviously.
We are definitely Team Arnold, aren't we? Like the three of us.
Oh, big time.
Unbelievable.
Guy's just the phenomenal trainer. And along those lines, I mean, I'm thrilled he's getting Medallia later this year, the Medallia d'Oro filly from last September at Keeneland. But some great news, which we just found out about an hour ago, the upstart that we bought a few weeks ago, a month or so ago over at Tattersall's, is safe and sound. He's on American soil. He's at Churchill Downs in quarantine. So excited to see what that horse can do for Arnold, who is just a phenomenal horseman and a classy guy, and a great job with Independence Avenue. Excellent race out of her. Before we say goodbye, everybody, we thought it'd be fun to walk down memory lane for just a few minutes here. Again, maybe this isn't the most legendary Preakness we've seen. I've seen some good ones. I know the two boys I'm talking with, the guys, they've seen some legendary runnings of the Preakness as well. But why don't we take a little step back here? And Tommy, I told Joe and Tommy, I'm like, hey, each of you guys give me your favorite Preakness. And for you, Tommy, it is the filly, and the timing's good with Ken McPeak, the trainer. Yeah. Here's a good one, man. This was the COVID Preakness, October 3rd of 2020. Here's Swiss Skydiver and Authentic.
This was just, I think back to, you know, races I loved watching. This is right at the top of my list. I mean, for a filly, and then you have the Derby winner right outside. They're just duking it out the entire length of this stretch. And it's funny enough, I actually watched the race again this morning. You know, Swiss Skydiver actually had a fairly similar trip to what Mystic Dan did in the Derby. She kind of hung around the wire. She made her move a little bit earlier than what Mystic Dan did, but it kind of eerily similar looking back at it. So maybe McPeak can do it again this year, going for a Triple Crown bid. But I just love Swiss Skydivers. I love the fillies. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, an amazing Preakness, and I was flabbergasted. I remember my reaction watching that. It was a similar reaction, I'm sure, looking back in time, Joe, to the one you picked. This is 07. Curlin, Street Sense, Hard Spun. I mean, it gets no better than this class of 3-year-olds.
Oh man, that's the reason I picked it. This is the best 3-year-old class I've seen in my lifetime so far, and it harkens back to kind of what's going to be a bygone era, where the top 3 finishers in the Derby all came back to run in the Preakness and renew their rivalry. And it was just a phenomenal race. You know, Hard Spun going 109-4 for 3/4. For him to then come back and run as well as he did on Belmont Day was awesome. And then Street Sense and Curlin here coming down to the wire. And, you know, Curlin was a lightly raced horse at this point. He had only run like 3 or 4 times. And for him to dig in, drop his head, and run down the Derby winner, who obviously ran a phenomenal race. He was no worse in the Preakness than he was in the Derby. And for him to go get him, like, I just thought that was incredibly impressive. And we obviously saw what Curlin went on to do in his career. So this was just kind of like the early portent of what was to come for him. Yeah, and just like you said, Jay, this class of 3-year-olds, like it still gets my heart racing watching these Triple Crown races.
And they all turn out to be solid sires. Curlin the best, but Street Sense has been elite, and Hard Spun's been very solid as well. This Preakness is my favorite that I've seen. This is the 97 edition. I I was out in the infield as a freshman in college, another lifetime ago somewhere. You've got the gray free house, near white free house on the lead, silver charms next to him, touch gold on the rail. He stumbled so badly out of the gate, but nearly won it, and Captain Bodgett on the outside. This was a crop of 3-year-olds that I look back a decade earlier, certainly had some parallels and similarities to the class of 07 with Curlin and Hardspun. They were just good horses. They showed up, they danced every dance, and their careers were absolutely marked by longevity. I mean, they were horses that ran, again, a bygone era, unfortunately. So again, it's always nice to appreciate the history and look back at your roots. And there's a lot to choose from with 148 runnings of the Preakness. For you guys, though, I hope you have a great weekend, and again, good luck to all of our starters coming up, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. We got a lot of action coming up. And like you said, leading up to the Belmont at Saratoga, we're going to have a bunch of action up there. And yeah, I like going down memory lane for the Preakness because everybody gets so wrapped up in the Derby. Preakness is sometimes kind of an afterthought, but there's been some phenomenal Preaknesses, phenomenal horses who have run in those races. So yeah, I appreciate you pulling those up because, it's a special race in its own right and shouldn't be totally overshadowed by the Derby.
All right. So Tommy, you have a good time Preakness Day at Churchill Downs. Have a pretzel for Joe and I, please. All right, Joe, you have fun at the races over the weekend at the Big A, and I'll try to stay cool here in South Florida. All of a sudden, it's summertime down here. It's pretty warm. It's just about time to head up to the spa. A little room as we say goodbye. We have a little room remaining, and I do mean a little, on that powerhouse beast of a More Than Ready colt going to Christophe Comont. And there's a little room as well on that beautiful Jimmy Creed colt, some updated video of him as well at Dr. Eisenman's in Ocala. Did you guys happen to check out the video I shared? The size of his hip and just how he's progressing in the 30 days since we bought him?
Yeah, I mean, he looked fantastic. I didn't get to see him at the sale, but I mean, I fell in love with him, seeing the photos of him. And, I'm head over heels now after seeing that video. I mean, holy smokes. I mean, talk about a Jimmy Creed. What else could you ask for? I mean, that hind end is just a machine, is what it looks like.
Yeah, we're gonna have some fun with him, Joe, aren't we?
Yeah, man. New York based, so I can see him, but also Maryland bred, so our people in the Mid-Atlantic can see him. And yeah, he looks like a lot of fun, and he looks like he's built up even since the sale. It looks like he's gotten a little bit more muscular, grown a little bit. Like, yeah, that video was awesome.
A Jaxon 2.0. Let's do it again. It's been fun with Jaxon. Yep, absolutely. And on that note, we'll keep the good thought. Have a great Preakness 149, everybody. And we'll see you next time here on WPT in 30.